After the solemnity of my dad's funeral, discussion swiftly turned to his substantial legacy of money and shares. During these talks, my brother-in-law, married to my sister Maya, boldly declared that she, being the oldest, should inherit everything including $10 million. This pleased them, though the lawyer quickly intervened to clarify that such decisions were not theirs to make. My name is Julian, a 39-year-old sales representative, married with 2 children. My father, despite his advanced age, was actively involved in a major company he part-owned. Maya, my elder sister, has always been somewhat troublesome, often clashing with our parents over her choices and lifestyle. Now in her 50s, she remains jobless, living life on her own. I've kept my distance due to our strained relationship. Maya's life took a dramatic turn when she introduced us to Logan on her 50th birthday, announcing their impending marriage. Logan was younger and had good looks, but lacked ambition and was generally disagreeable. My sister soon began asking our father for money to fund her lavish wedding plans, spending the money as quickly as it came and unabashedly asking for more, much to Dad's dismay. She seemed to believe that she would eventually inherit everything, so she saw no issue in her actions. Tragically, less than a year after her wedding, our father suffered a fatal heart attack while golfing. His death was a profound shock to everyone, leaving our family and his friends deeply saddened. While condolences flooded in, I couldn't remain passive. I took charge of the funeral arrangements, supporting my shocked mother throughout, while Maya was conspicuously absent, absorbed in her own world. The day after the funeral, as my mother and I were beginning to process our grief, a lawyer arrived to discuss my father's will. My mother and I were aware of its contents, but Maya and her husband, ignorant of the details, audaciously asserted that everything should rightfully go to Maya as the eldest. My brother-in-law even celebrated prematurely, convinced of their newfound fortune. However, the lawyer, visibly surprised by their assumption, corrected them sternly. Maya was not entitled to the entire inheritance as they had assumed. Their protestations that Maya, as the oldest daughter, should inherit it. It became clear that my brother-in-law had been counting on this windfall, a plan that was now crumbling before their eyes. As the lawyer spoke in a gentle tone, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. "Did you not realize that Maya is not Mr. Watson's biological daughter?" he asked. My sister Maya's face drained of color, her eyes darting anxiously towards our mother. Our mother's face was etched with a complex mix of emotions. I had always been aware that Maya was my half-sibling, but it seemed she had been kept in the dark about her true origins. In a state of shock, Maya grasped our mother's arm, shaking her slightly. "Mom, what does this mean? What are you saying?" "You're from my previous marriage," our mother confessed softly, her voice trembling under Maya's intense grip. Maya, who had often teased me about being the favorite child, now looked utterly stunned. But as the reality sank in, my brother-in-law quickly interjected, his voice tinged with hope. "But she was legally adopted, right? She should still have inheritance rights." "That's what I thought," Maya murmured in response, clinging to a sliver of hope. However, our mother slowly shook her head, her expression somber. "No, Maya, there was never a legal adoption." Both Maya and her husband were incredulous. "That can't be. I'm the oldest daughter. Even Dad said so," Maya protested, her frustration now visibly turning towards me. "I'm not going to let you take everything," she snapped at me, anger flaring in her eyes. Irritated by her sense of entitlement, I countered, "After all the support Dad gave you, you still say that?" "Be quiet." My sister and her husband continued to protest, unable to accept the situation. "But what's wrong with a father supporting his daughter?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the family drama unfold. "It's normal for parents to support their children, but you've used Dad's money to settle debts and handle your troubles," I said. At that moment, our cousin Julian, who had been quiet, suggested, "Why don't we let Maya see the will too?" "The will?" "I have no idea about that. It was her own fault for not paying attention when our father wanted us all to discuss the contents of the will. She had dismissed it to go out instead." My brother-in-law glared at her, frustration evident. What were you thinking? This was important. Faced with the reality of their situation, they agreed to listen to the will's reading. The lawyer then outlined my father's intentions clearly. The inheritance was meant for me and my mother. He also explained why he hadn't adopted Maya, disappointed by her reckless spending and her behavior towards me as she grew older. He had changed his mind. Realizing she had no legal claim, Maya was visibly shaken. "Damn it, what now?" she muttered under her breath. Suddenly, her husband's voice boomed in accusation. "You lied to me? You said you had money." His tone turned aggressive, shocking my mother and Maya, but I wasn't surprised. His greedy nature had shown before, possibly even motivating his marriage to Maya for financial reasons. "Maya, don't come back," until the argument was cut off as emotions ran high, leaving unresolved tensions and a deep sense of betrayal hanging in the air. As my brother-in-law Logan stormed out of the room, disappointment etched across his face. He muttered bitterly about the lost prospects of wealth. Left behind, my sister faced us, her expression seething with frustration and betrayal. "Mom, why wasn't I legally adopted? It's unfair that only Julian gets the inheritance. I deserve something too, but you mishandled it," she exclaimed, her voice cracking under the strain of tears. I was shocked by her outburst, but the lawyer remained composed, likely used to family disputes of this nature. "Why does Julian get everything?" she continued, her gaze sharp and accusing. "Because I'm Dad's biological son," I replied, trying to maintain calm. Her anger surged, and she nearly lunged at me, screaming, "It would have been better if you were never born." I thought to myself that even if I hadn't existed, Dad's decision might not have been different, given her track record. Before things could escalate further, the lawyer interjected, "Maya, if you continue this way, we might have to involve the police." She flinched at his words, perhaps reminded of her past legal troubles. Our mother, tears streaming down her face, called out gently to Maya. As the months passed, the inheritance proceedings were completed smoothly thanks to the lawyer's careful handling, though Maya and Logan occasionally grumbled. Despite their discontent, my mother still offered Maya some financial help, which I chose not to comment on. Their quick disappearance with the money, however, left a bitter taste among our relatives, reinforcing their reputation for opportunism. One day, to lift everyone's spirits, I took my mother, wife, and daughter out for a meal, following my wife's thoughtful suggestion. It was heartening to see my mother smile again, enjoying the company of her granddaughter. During the outing, I suggested, "Hey, Mom, why don't you come live with us?" Although Maya might drop by sometimes. She hesitated, understandably torn because Maya was her biological daughter. Plus, moving into the family home might invite more drama from Maya. I respected her concerns and asked her to think it over as we drove back to drop her off. As we approached the supposedly vacant family home, I noticed lights inside a sign that wasn't meant to be, as no helper was scheduled for that time. Perhaps Maya had returned. Parking the car, I suggested, "Let's pop in for a quick coffee." As we got out of the car and walked towards the entrance, a vehicle suddenly swerved towards us. Instinctively, I shielded my wife and daughter. Thankfully, the car only grazed me, and apart from the shock and a minor bruise, we were unharmed. The evening that was meant to be a peaceful family time had turned into another startling incident, making it clear that the drama with Maya was far from over. Thrown into a nearby flower bed by the impact, I took a hard knock. The car that hit me came to a jarring stop against the garage entrance. "Are you all right, honey?" my wife called out, rushing over with my daughter to help me up. Meanwhile, my mother stood by the entrance, visibly trembling and understandably shaken by the ordeal. In the chaos that followed, an ambulance whisked me away to the hospital, where I had to stay overnight for observation. Later, I discovered that the driver was none other than Logan, my brother-in-law. He told the police he had mistaken the accelerator for the brake, but I had my doubts about his sincerity. When my mother and sister visited me in the hospital, my sister's cold gaze met mine. "You're surprisingly resilient, aren't you?" she remarked. It crossed my mind then that had I been gravely injured, perhaps my mother would have stood to inherit everything. "Too bad for you," I retorted with a smirk, noticing my sister tense up. "You were counting on it, weren't you?" Her discomfort was palpable as she looked away. During our conversation, I revealed, "Well, Mom told me she plans to waive her inheritance in my favor, so causing such an accident was pointless." My sister seemed shocked by this revelation, unable to comprehend why anyone would refuse what they could rightfully claim. "I have a wife and kids, so Mom asked me to pass it on to them." "That's what parents do," I explained, as I continued revealing that I had made a will early on. Following Dad's example, my sister was left speechless. "Unfortunately, my share won't be going to Mom anymore," I added, watching as she trembled with frustration. "Can't you at least give me some? There's $10 million, right?" she pleaded. When I firmly refused, her face twisted into a furious expression, and she grabbed my collar, demanding half. I looked at her with pity as she screamed, perhaps driven to madness by the prospect of losing the inheritance. "Don't you realize that your greed would disappoint Dad?" I said as her face flushed with anger, her hand reaching towards my throat. "Maya, what are you doing?" my mother exclaimed, her voice raised as nurses rushed in to escort my sister out. Although my mother seemed inclined to defend her, it was clear that Maya had also directed insults towards her. "Where did I go wrong in raising her?" my mother lamented, her voice filled with sadness. Shortly after this incident, my mother's health declined, prompting my wife and I to step in to help with transportation and household tasks at the family home. This involvement seemed to irritate my sister further, likely because she had bumped into my wife during her visits to ask for money, or perhaps had heard about our help. The family dynamics continued to be strained, overshadowed by unresolved conflicts and the lingering effects of greed and desperation. One day, out of the blue, my sister abruptly called me. "From now on, we'll take care of Mom. You and your wife don't need to come anymore," she declared. I was puzzled by her sudden decision and tried to understand her reasoning, but she wouldn't listen and quickly hung up. My wife confirmed she had received the same abrupt message and dismissal. Worried about my sister's lack of experience in caregiving and managing household duties, I immediately reached out to my mother. To my surprise, I learned that my brother-in-law actually had some caregiving experience. Given that my mother was still relatively independent, it seemed manageable at least for the moment, and this gave me a small sense of relief. However, my relief was short-lived. Within a month, my mother was rushed to the hospital by ambulance due to a serious medication dosage error. She appeared alarmingly frail when we arrived, and the doctor was baffled, noting that my mother had never made such a mistake before. While my wife stayed with her at the hospital, I returned to the family home, only to find it in complete disarray. The fridge was empty, which was shocking because my mother loved to cook, and it appeared that the hired help had been dismissed without any discussion. Ashamed and furious for having trusted my sister, I discovered a significant amount of money had been withdrawn from my mother's bank account, though her bank card and PIN were supposed to be secure in the safe. Thankfully, the account containing the inheritance was untouched, kept in a safe deposit box, but most of the funds allocated for living expenses were gone. I collected essential items for my mother's hospital stay and retrieved her bank card, then returned to explain the situation. My mother was unaware of the missing bank card, but when I inquired about the medication error, she looked somber and confessed that it had been prepared by my brother-in-law. "Mom, perhaps it's best not to allow my sister into the house anymore," I suggested. "I promised to take care of you. But the house is in such disarray, and you've lost so much weight. Have you been eating properly?" My mother's words weighed heavily on me. "Mom, you should come live with us. I'll build a home where we can all be together," I proposed, causing her to break down in tears. However, her health continued to deteriorate despite the doctor's best efforts. Perhaps the stress inflicted by my sister had weakened her heart further. She never fully recovered and eventually passed away, almost following in my father's footsteps. Upon returning to the family home to make funeral arrangements, I discovered that all the valuables had vanished. It appeared my sister and brother-in-law had taken them in their desperate pursuit of money. Standing amidst the empty rooms, I was first shocked and then consumed by a fierce anger. I vowed to hold them accountable for their actions. The day after my mother's funeral, my sister and I were scheduled to meet with the lawyer. I was determined to address everything that had transpired and seek justice for the wrongs committed. At the meeting presumed to discuss the inheritance, my sister boldly proclaimed Mom's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, her daughter. I couldn't help but chuckle at her statement, given her apparent misunderstanding of the situation. "Let's see what the will says," I suggested, prompting the lawyer to reveal the document. As the will was read, my sister's face lost all color. "No, this can't be. Maya is not entitled to inherit anything. That's Dad's final wish," the lawyer stated firmly. My brother-in-law, unable to contain his frustration, swept items off the table in anger. "This is absurd. Maya is that old woman's biological child," he exclaimed. "Logan, did you try to harm my mom?" I confronted him directly. He shot me an irritated glare. "What?" "I never did such a thing," he retorted defensively. "Then why was there a mistake with her medication?" I pressed, not letting up. "Who cares about that, Julian? It's outrageous that we're not getting any inheritance," my sister interjected, losing her composure entirely. "What have you done?" I asked her, stunned by her attitude. It seemed she hadn't come rushing over after hearing about our mother's passing, but had been more concerned with the inheritance to cover her own expenses. "Tell me this isn't true. I'm getting nothing?" my sister demanded from the lawyer. The lawyer began to explain carefully. "After deducting the amount you withdrew and the items you sold, there's almost nothing left." She scratched her head in frustration, clearly dissatisfied with the outcome. "That can't be it. It can't be this little," she muttered to herself, seemingly out of touch with the reality of hard work and financial responsibility. I couldn't contain my contempt any longer. "Mom thought you'd take care of her, but you just took her money and abandoned her. You ungrateful person," I blurted out, my anger getting the better of me. "Taking care of someone costs money. You know," my sister shot back defensively. "Then show me the detailed expenses you used for Mom's living costs." "I'll cover the necessary expenses," I challenged her, determined to see the extent of her mismanagement and ensure accountability for her actions. I extended my hand to my sister, challenging her to provide the details of her expenses. Her face turned pale and her lips trembled. I don't have that. Without receipts, it won't be recognized," she stammered. The lawyer nodded in agreement, emphasizing the need for documentation, which left her speechless. Her husband, seeing her distress, tried to appeal to my sense of family. "Julian, your sister really needs help. Can't you lend her a hand, even just a little?" he pleaded with me. I stood firm, my patience wearing thin. "No," I replied, feeling the weight of my frustration. It was clear that my brother-in-law was also reaching his limit. If everything had gone as planned, Maya would have had the entire inheritance by now, he muttered under his breath. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, eager to understand his implication. Before I could probe further, he let slip a revealing comment. "Because of this guy, nothing ever goes smoothly. I was supposed to get a new car, but all I got was barely enough for repairs," he complained. My sister tried to interrupt, realizing the gravity of his words, but it was too late. "That's a serious accusation. It sounds like fraud," the lawyer observed, her tone cool and professional, a slight smile playing at her lips as she glanced at the couple. "That's illegal," I pointed out, remembering to remind them. "I clearly stated at the outset that this meeting would be recorded, and you both agreed to it." My brother-in-law paled upon realizing his mistake. Turning to him, I declared, "Logan, I'll be pressing charges for that accident." "Don't be absurd. There's no evidence," he blustered, still in denial. "You've just provided the evidence yourself," I countered firmly. My sister burst into tears and shook my brother-in-law in frustration. "You fool! It's all your fault. What are we going to do now?" she sobbed. Eventually, my brother-in-law faced criminal charges, and his previous offenses also came to light, leading to his detention by the police. My sister, implicated as an accomplice, received a lesser sentence. However, unable to afford her rent, she sought help from relatives but was rejected by everyone. As for me, I continued to work diligently, not relying on any inheritance. Instead, I found solace in the dividends from stock investments, a small pleasure that offered some comfort amidst the turmoil.